Hey, welcome to our New York Giants Preservation Society meeting for today, August 1st, the dog days of summer for baseball season. Tonight we have Dave Gunzerath. Dave, I'll tell you a little bit more later, but Dave is going to be talking to us about a topic that nobody's really ventured to tackle, and that's the Giants pay-per-view in New York and cable, stuff like that in New York and in San Francisco, along with the Dodgers. I'll get back to Dave in a second. Just want to give you some other updates. There'll be no meeting next week. The following week, we will have Josh Rawwich, the president of the Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum in Cooperstown. He's going to talk about the hall itself, what's going to be going on the next couple of years, and also his career. He actually worked with the San Francisco Giants. Then we'll take another week after that. Summer, it's hard to get everybody together, so I figured August we have one less meeting than normal. But we will have Ralph Carhart, and his presentation will also have to do with the Hall of Fame. He wrote a book called The Hall Ball, The Journey to Unite Cooperstown Immortals with a Simple Baseball.
Sounds what like day is that? What day was it?
That'd be the 29th, I believe, Steve. 2 weeks after the 15th. So yeah, I had it right. Couple of other things. I'm presently looking into this symposium with dates. I contacted the Giants earlier in the week to see when they would be coming to New York as far as the travel, the Giants enterprises. Pat Gallagher, great to see you, by the way. We will work around them because they're going to supposedly bring a lot of people, and I would think it would probably be against the Mets because the Yankee series is like 2 weeks into the season, so I would think that might be a little tough. But then again, I don't know how they do things. All I know is they do things first class. There should be another Polo Ground newsletter coming out honoring the 54 team. That'll be within the next 2 weeks. Not heard anything back regarding the Polo Ground area yet. And I think that about covers it. So before I introduce Dave Gunzerath, I met Dave because of the Cooperstown Symposium.
Bring in your phone.
We were both slotted, and I looked at what he was talking about, and it was the Dodgers and the Giants and all of the TV things that went on with both teams in New York and then later in California. And again, I felt that it was a topic that nobody really has broached on any of our meetings, and I thought it would be very, very interesting. We spoke together in one of the sections. Dave's a really great guy, and prior to hearing him speak, I got in touch with him, and he said he would like to do this. So we have a nice crowd for him tonight. So why don't we all welcome Dave Gunzerath. Dave, the floor is yours. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Gary, and thank you, everyone. I'm going to call up Can. Bear with me for just a second. Okay. Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Great.
Good.
Okay. So again, thank you, Gary, for the invitation. I'm really excited to be speaking with you tonight. I've watched quite a few of your meetings on the YouTube channel, so I'm really excited to speak with everybody tonight because there's so much knowledge in this group, and I can't wait to get to the discussion because I'm sure I'm going to come away learning some things tonight that I don't know. But as Gary said, my topic is on the role that TV rights played in the move to California of the Dodgers and the Giants, as well as what actually transpired once they got out there as it relates to TV. And just to kind of set the stage a little bit, this is a chart of the games that were televised during the years that Horace Stoneham owned the Giants in San Francisco. So from 58 to 75. And as you can see, a vast majority of the games weren't available on TV. And so, and this is in contrast to most of the teams in Major League Baseball at the time. In the 60s and 70s, most teams in the National League, at least, were airing about a third of their games, with the exception of the Dodgers and the Giants. And the reasoning for this, and actually something that came to mind as I was putting this together is, I mean, Gary, you're the man who wrote the book about following a team 3,000 miles away from, where they're located. But an interesting little tidbit is that you living in New York probably had more opportunities to see the Giants on local TV, Giants games, than people who lived in San Francisco did, between watching games, the Mets broadcast, because the Mets broadcast a lot of their games, most of the home games and about half of the road games, and plus the occasional game of the week. And the Giants were, on the game of the week pretty frequently back then. Those games were actually blacked out in San Francisco, but the rest of the country could see them. So you might have had an opportunity to see at least as many games as somebody living in San Francisco, yet living in New York. And the roots for the situation really go back to the New York experiences of the Giants and the Dodgers. And both of those teams, as well as the Yankees in New York, really jumped into TV early. They were all late to the game when it came to starting local radio broadcasts of their games. They held out for quite a while. They were the last major league teams to air their games on the radio. But when it came to TV, New York was very early in the curve in terms of having TV stations on the air. And so all the teams jumped in very quickly. And from 1947 on, aired all 77 of their home games. And so it's a very expansive TV policy that contrasts with what I just showed once they arrived in California. The Dodgers had a very similar TV policy in California to the Giants. I should just add that. So, but they initially were very bullish about this. They thought it was really going to help promote the teams. But this chart illustrates the attendance beginning in 47 until the last season that they were in New York in 57. And as you can see, it's a continual downward trend. And except for a small spike in 51 for the Giants and a larger spike in 54, both pennant-winning years, it's a pretty clear trend downward in terms of attendance. And there are a lot of reasons why that happened, but really a focus came on the television policies. They're airing their games. They're making it too easy for people to be able to just watch the game at home or in the neighborhood tavern and not actually go out to the ballpark and buy a ticket. And as a result, they start rethinking the idea. And so after the 52 season, which really seemed to be a turning point, both owners, Stoneham and O'Malley, really started to take a hard look at what they were doing with their television policies. In a sense, they're trapped if you think about it, because they have long-term contracts in place with advertisers to air their games in New York. They also have an increasing need for the TV revenues that they're getting from these contracts because attendance is going down. So their gate receipts and all the revenues that they make from in-person attendance are going down. So TV revenue is more and more important to them. And perhaps most importantly, they've set these expectations among the fan base in New York that the games are going to be on TV. Yet, as early as 1953, both owners are recognizing that we've got to change the model somehow. And, as Horace Stoneham said, eventually TV should be put on an as-you-go basis where the stay-at-home fans will have to contribute. So this is early 1953. They're both talking about moving the games to some sort of a pay TV system. Now, when I talk about pay TV in the early 1950s, it may not be quite the same as you would think of it today. It's not cable TV. Cable TV existed back then, but it was really pretty much confined to rural areas where it was just serving to bring in distant broadcast signals that couldn't be received easily over the air. It was helping people, get access to television stations. But really, this is more like what later became known as pay-per-view television. You buy individual programs. You pay for an individual program and you have access to it. It could have been delivered either over the air or via a wire or a cable. So it could go either way. That was really not central to the idea of pay TV. It could be either or. Without advertising generally was the concept. And also, there were two models being put forward. One was what you would think of as pay TV, that you have access to these shows on your home television. But there was also an effort by theater owners trying to make a TV model work, that you actually went and bought a ticket at the theater and watched it in a communal setting at the theater. So they were kind of going head to head in trying to lure programming to their respective proposed services. And at the time, this was only being done on an experimental basis. The FCC, at least for over-the-air television, you would have to get approval of the FCC to do this, the Federal Communications Commission, and they were only authorizing it on an experimental basis, which meant that it was for a limited amount of time. You'd do a test, might run 6 months, might run a year, and then sit back and everybody would assess what happened. That's a difficult way to start a new business, particularly one that might be as cost intensive as something like a television service. So on the in-home pay TV, I'm having trouble moving screen forward. Just if you can give me a second. There we go. There were three companies that were trying to get an in-home pay TV service off the ground. Two of them you've probably heard of. One is Paramount Pictures, the movie studio, very well known, and they wanted to get an outlet for their movie product on a pay basis. Pay television basis. Second company was called Phone Vision, and that was a division of the Zenith company. Zenith was a very prominent manufacturer of radio and TV sets. And then there's a third company that, unless you've heard about it in the context of what we're talking about tonight, you probably wouldn't hear about it at all if you have. And that's a Skyatron Electronics company. Skyatron was a small electronics company, but they developed this technology for a pay television service, that you'd have a box in your home, you would insert a card into it, press a button, and that button would create a connection within the box that you'd be able to see an unscrambled picture on your television screen. And it would also create a record of what you bought, so they'd be able to bill you for it. Skyatron seemed like the big underdog in this battle, but the one thing they did have going for them was a gentleman by the name of Matty Fox. Matty Fox was a one-of-a-kind guy. He was a supreme salesman. He was kind of like a fictional character out of a Hollywood movie. He was a Hollywood wonder boy, in fact, a Hollywood executive back in the 1930s. And he was credited with turning around the fortunes of Universal Studios, taking them from near bankruptcy to earning nearly $10 million a year in profit, doing all this by the time he was age 25. He moved on from Universal he cut this deal with the government of Indonesia, where he became the official trade broker for the country of Indonesia for all business dealings that they had with the United States. It was about $150 million worth of business. The US government wasn't too happy with him about it, but it was certainly a lucrative thing. But it gives you a sense for his salesmanship skills. And he could sell anything. He could sell himself. He actually married Miss America of 1951, quite an accomplishment for himself. He was an interesting guy. And so he's trying to develop this system on a parallel course with what I just said. O'Malley and Stoneham are starting to think of the future being pay TV. Now, one little thing I should point out here, he's created his own company that has a relationship with Skyatron Electronics, but they're two separate companies. His company is called Skyatron of America, and he's developing this pay TV service using the Skyatron technology, and he'll pay a licensing fee to Skyatron Electronics for every subscriber he ends up getting for this service. So that's the deal that they have in place to do this. So fast forward from 53 up to 1957. And over this time, the Dodgers and the Giants are both having negotiations with New York City. They're not really going anywhere. The buzz is building louder that they actually might move their franchises. And so beginning in the spring of 57, you start to have these rumors circulating about pay TV being this important piece that might lure Walter O'Malley and the Dodgers to Los Angeles. And news comes out of the National Association of Broadcasters convention that there's talk that there's this deal in place between Fox and O'Malley to make that happen. This talk starts getting louder the next month in May, as there's more speculation going on about this deal that might be in place. And finally, by June, it's really kind of exploded into a big news item. And pay TV is becoming central to the discussion about the possibility of the teams relocating. So what also happens in June of 57 is that the House Antitrust Subcommittee starts holding a series of hearings in June and July. And this is, as they did throughout the 1950s, about the baseball's antitrust exemption, at least in name, but they were really about the possible relocations of the Dodgers and Giants. And O'Malley, Stoneham, and Matty Fox are all called to testify at this hearing. So it gives you a little bit of a sense for the role that pay TV's taken on, that Matty Fox is called to Washington to testify in front of this committee. At this hearing, Horace Stoneham lays out the scenario to give you a sense for the potential attractiveness of pay TV for his franchise. And he throws out this hypothetical that if we got 500,000 viewers for a game at $1 a home, the Giants would get 25% of that they would pocket as their own. So that's $125,000. You project that out over the 77 home games over the course of the season, and you're looking at nearly $10 million. So compare that to the 56 TV radio combined revenue of the Giants, which was not even $750,000 million. And you can see the attractiveness from a financial standpoint that this held out. Now, this is a very rosy hypothetical that he threw out there with 500,000 viewers. But if you think about it, if you only take 10% of that, 50,000 viewers, you're still looking at close to $1 million in TV revenue alone per season, which, exceeds what they had been doing. Plus, you don't have the same potential risk to in-person attendance because the games aren't being ubiquitously aired on an over-the-air TV station in the market. So we all know what comes next. In August, the Giants announce that they're moving to San Francisco beginning with the 58 season. In October, the Dodgers make their announcement. And from a TV standpoint, what this does is it frees both teams. It voids their New York TV deals. So they are now moving to markets that don't have any preconceived ideas of how, television, how many games should be on the air or anything like that. And it's an opportunity for a complete reset in how these teams are approaching TV. And for the 58th season, they take this opportunity and do the reset. Horace Stoneham is very resolute about this. I mean, one of the things that struck me as part of this project is Stoneham, when he made a decision, seems to really, he makes a decision. He's very decisive. And so he's saying there's no TV of any time that's going to happen once the team has moved to San Francisco. No free TV, I should add. O'Malley, as was his wont, was a little more equivocal about it. He said, as of now, we have no plans to televise this year. The date of O'Malley's announcement is somewhat important because it's 2 days after he secured the deal to lease the Los Angeles Coliseum as the interim home for the Dodgers. And I can go into some speculation about that, but his fallback, I'm sorry. Yeah. Now, his fallback would have been Wrigley Field, the minor league stadium that he owned in LA, which had a very small capacity, relatively small capacity of a little over 20,000 seats. And it's interesting to speculate whether O'Malley would have taken the same position had he been forced to play at Wrigley instead of the Coliseum, where he could fit 92,000 paying fans. But we can talk about that in the discussion. However, something happens that throws a wrench into the plans here. And in LA, that's known as Proposition B. That was a referendum that was placed on the ballot to get public approval of the city council's deal with the Dodgers for the Chavez Ravine land. And this was of critical importance to the Dodgers. They had to prevail in this campaign, or else, their entire reason, their primary reason at least, for moving to Los Angeles would have been thrown out the window, or O'Malley would be starting over on things. So this was really important to them. Skyatron was moving forward and starting to establish its service in Los Angeles. It had gotten a franchise agreement from the city council. And what happened was Skyatron stepped back. Because of this, because of the importance of this to the Dodgers, which was equally important to Skyatron, that the Dodgers prevail in this election. And plus, there were rumblings that a referendum similarly would be placed on the ballot about the council's agreement with Skyatron, something that was going to be financed by the theater owners of Southern California. Again, they weren't happy with what was happening here with in-home pay TV. So Skyatron steps back. They decide to delay implementing or starting to build out their service in Los Angeles. And as a result of that, O'Malley reconsiders his position on televising games. And in late April, he announces, okay, because of concerns that have been raised to us by shut-ins and others, we're going to air the games we play in San Francisco back to Los Angeles on KTTV. And so beginning then, the 11 games at the time that they were airing, that they were playing in San Francisco, were going to be carried back to Los Angeles. So you can see this, the LA Times front page, big news in LA at the time. It doesn't matter that Sputnik is up there. It doesn't matter that, there's arms negotiations going on between the Russians and NATO. It's the Dodgers games in San Francisco. That's the big news. Sporting News actually captured the rationale a little more accurately for this. It's a pitch to voters. He's got the Prop B campaign going on. The outcome is uncertain. It looks like it's going to be a close election. And so this is a public relations move by O'Malley. Excuse me. Proposition B, the Dodgers are successful in the campaign. They win by a very narrow margin. However, there are legal challenges to the agreement as well, the city council's agreement. So things are delayed out on the pay TV front for a while because of all this playing out, until they know for a fact that they're going to be able to build Dodger Stadium. In San Francisco, it's a different situation with a similar outcome. News comes out in April that Horace Stoneham has a 15-year deal already in place with Skyatron that's going to pay him nearly $40 million. The situation in San Francisco is different than in Los Angeles, because in San Francisco, you have a publicly financed stadium that the city is building. And therefore, the city has a very direct interest in the gate receipts for the ballpark. That they want attendance to be as high as possible because they're collecting all the parking revenue for the new stadium. They're going to control the advertising signage within the stadium. And so they have a very direct interest in making sure that attendance is as high as possible. And they're fearing from this that the new stadium that they're spending all this money to build is going to become a glorified TV studio. That's what they called it. So as a result, the Board of Supervisors in San Francisco starts stalling on the appropriations for the new stadium. And that gets Stoneham's attention. So even though he remains strongly against putting any games on over-the-air television, he does slow things down with Skyatron on the pay TV front. And that slows down in by the end of 58, it looks like it's going to start in 59. By early 59, it looks like pay TV is going to start around mid-year. And by opening day of 1959, the 1959 is off the table from the TV standpoint. And it looks like it's going to happen in 1960. I'm sorry, did you have a question? I see a hand up there.
We'll save those for the end, Dave.
Okay. So there have been all these delays both in Los Angeles and San Francisco of building out the system. And the one thing that's kind of been happening under behind the scenes that most people didn't know about is that Skytron itself wasn't as flush financially as they had led everyone to believe. And at the end of 1959, the SEC opens an investigation of Skytron. There's a couple of reasons for this. One was, remember I said there's two separate companies, Skytron Electronics and Skytron of America. Matty Fox was Skytron of America. Well, they had blurred the lines on that in a lot of their representations to the marketplace. And so people were thoroughly confused about, thinking that these are all one company when they're actually two. And it turned out when they start doing the investigation, while there was only this licensing deal that really connected the two companies formally, it turned out Skytron Electronics didn't really have anything else going for it in terms of potential future business other than the success of Skytron of America. And so its failure to note that in its representations to people buying its stock was something that the SEC didn't look kindly upon. There was also another issue when they started doing this investigation. Matty Fox was having troubles of his own. He was deeply in debt, and he had received a loan of stock from Skytron Electronics. And he then used that stock as collateral on some of the loans that he had, which was all well and good until he defaulted on the loans. And when the creditors tried to cash in that stock, it turned out the stock was never formally registered with the SEC. So they're in trouble for that. And so things are not going well, and the SEC finds Skytron guilty. It wasn't the formal designation, but that's for all intents and purposes, looks like a death knell for Skytron. It really opens them up to legal liability for all the creditors, anybody who had bought the stock. And that's for a cash-strapped company who's heavily in debt. They're engaged in this highly speculative startup business. Things don't look good at all. It looks like they're dead in the water, in fact. So what happens in San Francisco, keep in mind, 1958, 1959, 1960 seasons have passed. The Giants haven't had one game on television in San Francisco. Not a national game, not a local game. And people are getting restless, and the Board of Supervisors demanding that they start airing games on TV. And at this point, with his dreams of pay TV seemingly dashed, Horace Stoneham starts to exhibit some flexibility about it. And finally, in November, he announces, okay, we'll do what the Dodgers are doing. We will air the games we play in Los Angeles back to San Francisco. And that's what they start doing in 1961. So they do it for the 61 season. They do it for the 62 season. And then something somewhat unexpected happens. A new company emerges from the ashes of Skytron Electronics. Skytron Electronics still holds the patent to the technology. Matty Fox still holds the license agreement to market that, to bring that to market. And he's renamed his company now Tollvision of America under the better late than never category. He makes it a little less confusing name. And so three well-heeled companies form a new company called Subscription Television. It's Reuben H. Donnelly, best known as the producer of the Yellow Pages telephone directories. Lear Siegler, who is an electronics company and a conglomerate who's still in existence today, actually. And William R. Statz, which was the largest brokerage firm on the West Coast. They come together with plans to issue a public stock offering to try to raise $22 million. And also recognizing that perhaps Matty Fox isn't the best guy to lead this effort publicly, given what transpired previously with Skytron, they bring in a new guy. And his name is Pat Weaver, very well-known gentleman in the advertising and radio and television businesses. Today, he might be best known as the father of actress Sigourney Weaver. But back then, he was kind of a legendary figure in the business. He was at NBC and created the Today and Tonight shows, which are still on the air and still two of the most profitable programs in television history. So he did bring instant credibility to this new effort. However, they still have the same old problem in that the theater owners don't like him a bit. They're able to raise pretty substantial money, and they get together and they propose putting an initiative on the California state ballot to just outlaw pay television. This ad was placed in financial sections of California newspapers in October of '63. Kind of, it's their shot across the bow at subscription television. They're looking to depress the public stock offering that they're being planned. And it caused STV to scale back their stock offering from 22 million that they originally planned to about 16 million. Keep in mind, these guys, the theater owners still have aspirations, and they're starting to make some money on television with things like closed circuit boxing. This is the first Clay Liston fight, which was right around this exact time, and the theater owners are making a nice chunk of change with these closed circuit telecasts, and plus at the time they're also airing movies across multiple runs, not only a first run like today, but second and third runs of popular movies. They're still making a lot on that. They fear the competition that pay television may present to them in that area. So they have a very vested interest here in knocking these guys down. And they're pretty successful in getting something on the ballot. By April, they've collected over 1 million signed petitions to put this on the California state ballot. About 750,000 proved to be valid, which was more than enough to get it on. So Proposition 15 was placed on the ballot for the November 1964 election in California. And so STV's trying to build out this expensive new system centered on Dodgers and Giants baseball still. At the same time, they've got this political campaign being waged against them. And to top things off, Matty Fox has a sudden heart attack in early June, a little more than a month before they're actually scheduled to launch the service in Los Angeles. And so he's out of the picture. He died young. So things move forward. The service actually does get on the air in Los Angeles. Starts in July 17th with the Dodgers-Cubs game. That's Buzzy Bavasi watching the crystal clear picture. One of the things that all the press accounts of the STV service rave about is the picture quality, because it was being delivered via a wire. They were doing that to avoid FCC jurisdiction. So picture quality apparently was very good. $1.50 for the telecast it would cost you. People held watch parties that they'd invite people over, and for $1.50 they watched the game. In San Francisco, I'm sure we have a lot of people, in the audience that are familiar with the geography of the area. The service initially was serving the Sunset and Richmond districts on either side of Golden Gate Park. About 2,000 subscribers were in place by the time they were ready to launch the service in August. They had more orders than that. It's just they couldn't fulfill them all quickly enough. And this is an ad that that was placed the day that the service was being launched. And also gives you a sense for the range of programming. While the Giants-Braves game was the feature attraction that weekend, they also had available The Great Escape, a very popular movie at the time, and a fairly recent movie at the time summer '64. They had a lecture by Arthur Schlesinger, the historian, a Carol Channing performance. Things were priced between 50 cents and $1.50 generally. And as far as the launch itself, couldn't have gone any better if you're a Giants fan, really. They launched on August 14th. Bobby Bolin pitched a one-hitter, and there were solo home runs by the three Hall of Famers, Mays, McCovey, and Cepeda, led the Giants to a 3-0 win. So from this point forward, the plan is to televise all the home games via this pay TV service. However, it turns out that STV at this point in time is starting to run out of money. And what they start to do is they cut back on their marketing, they cut back on their build out, and they're not really going to expand any more than they are at the launch point until the election is determined in November. And so the rest of this, included a couple of slides just to give you a little bit of a sense for how the campaign played out. This is one of the representative ads that appeared in newspapers during the World Series, trumpeting that this could be the last World Series on free TV, which was frankly not a lie, because the contracts, the national World Series contracts, were in place through the 1966 season at this point. So even if pay TV did take over, it wouldn't be till 1967 at the earliest for the World Series. This is my personal favorite ad. Darn That Pay TV really kind of appeals to the heartstrings. A lot of emotional appeals as part of the campaign. You got to hand it to the anti-pay TV forces. They did a pretty good job creatively. In fact, they had TV and radio ads running. There was a jingle that, unfortunately, as far as I know, the melody has been lost to history, but the lyric was, pay TV, before you're done, they'll charge for air and rent the sun. So they were going all out on trying to get people to get out and vote yes on Prop 15. On the other hand, STV, for the few ads that they could afford to run and could get placed, which was another problem because some newspapers and TV stations refused to sell them advertising. It doesn't really stand up creatively. It's text heavy. It appeals intellectually. It makes very sound arguments, but it's not quite at the same creative level as some of the ads on the other side. The one thing that they did do is they tried to replicate, if you're familiar with the Prop B campaign that the Dodgers had fought in '58, they did something called Dodger-thon. That was like a 5-hour telethon shortly before the election to promote past Prop B. The subscription TV people try to do something similar with a 2-hour special. You can see a couple of the names on there, Don Drysdale and John Rosebarrow from the Dodgers, but they had some pretty big names. I mean, Brando was there, Theodore Bickel, Ralph Bellamy, Mort Saul, some pretty big names. The Actors Guilds, technical guilds were all for STV. They saw it as a way to create more jobs. But as you can also see, it aired at 10:30 p.m. on Channel 9, which at the time was KHJ, a smaller independent station, and 10:30 at night is not exactly prime time, at least, for something like this. So not too unpredictably, California voters in their wisdom voted to bar pay TV. It was about a 2-to-1 vote. It wasn't close at all. And while STV would ultimately prevail upon appeal on constitutional grounds, it took a couple of years for the court cases to play out. And by that time, the company was out of business. And with it, the Dodgers and Giants' hopes for pay TV of that era were dashed. And so just heading back to the opening where I started, back to that chart, I added the dotted line where the '64 election took place. And, as you can see, the policy didn't change too much. In 1966, the Giants started adding one Sunday road game per opponent other than the Dodgers over the course of the year. So it brought them up to 17 per year. That stayed until the early 1970s. They added a few more games. In the later 70s, they added a few more. But even into the 1980s, the Giants were only airing about 23 games a year of the 162 game schedule on the local TV stations. So, one of the things I've been wondering about is, especially in the early 70s where the Giants' attendance really bottomed out, why the Giants didn't air more games. You would think the TV revenue that they might have been able to realize from that would have been very helpful to the franchise at the time that they were having such financial difficulties, but that's something I don't have an answer to. I can speculate about. I've corresponded with Steve Treader about that. He has some thoughts on that, but neither of us really know the answer to that. So with that, I'll turn it back to Gary, and thank you all. And I appreciate it, and looking forward to the discussion.
Dave, I got to tell you, like I said, the main reason I tracked you down was it'd be a topic that we haven't heard before, and this certainly was. And thoroughly researched. You did a fabulous job, and I hope the extra minutes that you got to spend with us more than Cooperstown helped you out as well. So,
thank you, Gary, very much. So.
We'll open up with Steve. Steve, you are first.
Great presentation, a topic that really hasn't been discussed, I guess, by anybody. Certainly not in this group, but we've had a lot of great discussions. I was young, but I certainly remember, even though I lived in New York, when the Dodgers finally started televising games in San Francisco. There was a point in your presentation where Horace Stoneham said, no games will be on TV, or no games will be on free TV. We've discussed this in this group here, and I think it was Channel 13. Harvey, you can correct me if I'm wrong. All Giants, Pirates, and Cardinal road games were televised back to New York. And I just turned my television on and was able to watch them. So
I think it was Phillies also, Steve.
Not sure. Okay, maybe it was. But the point is, where did that fit into the Horace Stoneham philosophy of no free games? Or don't you know it's possible too?
Right. I mean, he was concerned about the gate, and he really thought that when he televised the games from the Polo Grounds home in New York, that really he thought that was the death knell for the franchise. That really.
No, this was when the Giants moved.
Yeah. Understand that, and I'm not sure. I don't know much about that, actually.
Okay, that's fine.
I'd like to know more, but I'm not sure whether that was some kind of network that was formed in order to do that, to fill that void of National League games in New York when there wasn't a National League team there, or how the teams were directly involved. I'd have to do more research on that.
Okay, I mean, it was great for the Giant fans because all of a sudden we got to see them again. We were able to hear them because all the games, all their home games in San Francisco were broadcast on radio, WINS radio in New York. They were recreated, Les Kiter, and that was outstanding. But once we got to see them on television, it was a huge deal. Thank you. Great presentation.
Thank you. I'm sorry. Do you know, did that start in 58 or was it a little later?
I know it was 59, but I have a feeling it was also 58. I think it was instant.
Thank you, Steve. Mars, you are up. Unmute, Mars.
Okay, thank you for joining us. That was very informative, which brings up a few questions and statements I made. A statement I'd like to make. The 1958 Giants-Colts championship football game before the Super Bowl. I have a recollection of it being blacked out in New York City and having to drive out with my pop somewhere in either Connecticut or Long Island to a bar to watch it on TV and the TV reception was horrible. So they even blacked out the championship football game. So bringing it back to baseball, didn't LA originally own the Dodger Stadium at Chevers Ravine until O'Malley bought it? That's my first question. And then what can you reiterate, when was the first year that the Giants started televising, I believe on KTVU, home
16.
games, and how many were they?
Well, the home games, it's a good question because it had to be in the 80s. Before then, they weren't, all of the games that they telecast were road games. So I don't know the year precisely, but it would have to be 82, 83, 84, sometime around then, I would guess. The first question on LA, and there are probably people better equipped to answer this one on the call, but I do know some things about the deal that the city had made with the Dodgers. It was land that the city had held, and they had reclaimed, I believe, from was it Title One, that the federal government was going to invest in Chavez Ravine, but the city had the land. They basically titled it over to O'Malley and the Dodgers. They made infrastructure improvements, but O'Malley built the stadium privately out of his own money. Did
So,
that answer your question, Mars?
yeah, just to go over one point, and that is, so eminent domain, LA took over the land,
Right.
but at any point when the stadium was being built or completed, did the city of LA own that, and then O'Malley subsequently bought it?
I don't believe so. I believe they titled it over to O'Malley before he started building. I believe that's the case. But again, there may
Okay.
be somebody else on the call who has more direct knowledge.
Well, it depends on, I have so many books. It depends which book you read. One claims that that LA actually built the stadium and then O'Malley bought it from them. And then I've had people in this group, like Dan Taylor, disagree with me about that. So, I mean, it depends on what you read. Now, did you also say that O'Malley owned Wrigley Field, that he bought it from the Wrigley family?
He did prior to, I believe it was prior to the 57 season. They basically traded franchises with Fort Worth, and Wrigley, turned over the LA franchise to O'Malley, which gave him the rights to the market then.
And I was always wondering why, since it was a much more suitable baseball park like Seal Stadium instead of the LA Coliseum. I was wondering if you have any insight on why O'Malley, aside from attendance, chose the LA Coliseum to play baseball.
I think you hit it the nail on the head. I mean, it's the attendance and the 92,000 seats. When he went out there, he negotiated with the Rose Bowl in Pasadena, but the Pasadena residents pretty much put the kibosh on that. They didn't want the Dodgers playing in the Rose Bowl. And so then he's left with options of being the Coliseum and Wrigley Field. And Wrigley Field, better baseball stadium, but it can only accommodate 21 or so thousand people, doesn't have a lot of parking availability. The Coliseum rather, you don't have those problems, even though it's not a baseball stadium by any means. So I mentioned earlier about, the TV implications of that. I've asked myself the question, if O'Malley would have been forced to play at Wrigley and the 21,000 capacity, he'd have a lot more incentive to put games on TV, because you're going into a new market. You can only fit 21,000 people at a time into your stadium. You really want to kind of promote it out more. Plus, because he's only able to sell 21,000 seats a game, he might need some more TV revenue than he would if he's in the Coliseum and he can fit up to 90,000 people in if he has to. So, it all boils down to the money on why they went where they went.
Well, isn't it ironical that Stoneham could have said, okay, let's play at Memorial Stadium in Berkeley or Stanford's football field, but he chose to play in a baseball park that only held about 22,000 at Seal Stadium.
Right, right. Although
Thank
great location for Seal Stadium right downtown. So, and he was only going to stay there for 2 years too, which probably entered into the equation that they actually were going to get the stadium done by 1960.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Stephen.
Mike, you're up. Bill?
Oh, I'm sorry. I was sleeping on that one. TV is something that's just absolutely fascinating, as what tied so many of us to baseball. And I was going to ask you two quick questions, then some observations about TV watching in the Bay Area in the early 1960s. One, something you pointed out, if O'Malley owned Wrigley Field, that meant that in 1961, he was the landlord for the Angels, as well as in 62 and 63 when they moved to Dodger Stadium, which was known as Chavez Ravine when the Angels played there. Is that right? That he was their landlord in 61?
Actually, no, because I believe by that point in time he had turned over Wrigley Field to the city in exchange for Chavez Ravine. That was part of the deal.
Was that part of the deal? The other question was, we're zoned in on the Giants and Dodgers, aren't we? Every time we get together here, but were there other teams that were dallying in the pay TV arena at that time, or was it just a Giant Dodger phenomenon?
I think a lot of people were looking to see how this played out. Initially, when O'Malley was initially negotiating with Skyatron, he had drawn up a contract with them that he put into escrow, not to be operative, but to serve as a model for anybody else in the major leagues who wanted to set up a similar deal to use. So, and everybody kind of, said, oh, this looks interesting, we'll keep our eye on it. But as far as I know, it never got that serious with anybody else. In fact, certain franchises were happy to just stay off TV after the early 1950s when, they thought they were getting hurt by TV. Franchises like the Braves, for instance, for when they moved to Milwaukee, they didn't have TV either. So and there's a couple other things that came into play, like, one little technicality here that actually, I think, plays a role in Stoneham choosing San Francisco over Minneapolis. And I've never heard anyone talk about this, so I don't know how real it is, but I don't think pay TV would have been a real option for Stoneham in Minneapolis had he chosen to go there, because the company, Skyatron, was looking to avoid FCC jurisdiction. And that's one of the reasons they created this wired system rather than try to air over the air, which would have been much more economical. And they probably could have gotten it up running if it wasn't for the fear of the FCC. Skyatron, one of the benefits of having the teams in Los Angeles and San Francisco is that they were in the same state. And so because they were in the same state, Skyatron didn't open itself up to possibility of the FCC stepping in and saying, hey, this is interstate commerce, therefore, we have a hand to play in this. So a long-winded answer to your question, but as far as I know, no other teams were seriously entertaining it beyond taking a serious look at what the Giants and the Dodgers were doing.
I will tell you that in the early 1960s, in the city where I grew up on the peninsula, everybody tuned into those Giants and Dodgers games. It was such a treat that, you'd have parties and people would get together to watch, because it was a tremendous phenomenon. Because the day of the weekly Saturday day of the game a week, well, that was not permitted by Stoneham's edict on any of the Oakland or San Francisco stations. So it was a big deal to get those games. We never missed a Giant Dodger game. So, of course, that meant that we did watch Koufax's no-hitter. Fortunately, that was one of the downer games, obviously. I would also tell you that in order to get the the day of the Saturday game of the week. In April every year, my dad would get up on the roof and I would assist him. I would be down by the TV. We would move the antenna. So we lost some of the good reception for the Oakland, San Francisco stations, but we got KDSW Salinas. So we would get Salinas. And on a good Saturday, there wasn't much snow. But on a bad Saturday, either one, there was a lot of snow, or there was a lot of Yankees. All I remember was we got way too many Yankee games on. Occasionally we would get the Giants, but people were starved for TV, for baseball on TV, at least in the Bay Area then. Maybe someone else can chime in on that.
Thank you, Bill. Ed Freer, you're up.
I got it.
Yes, I'm relaying a business question as a New York baseball Giants fan. You mentioned that the TV revenue was about $1 million in 1957 when they left. And New York, as the biggest market then and still the biggest TV market now, I'm sure it would have grown. But then I saw you had no TV revenue for the first 3 years in San Francisco, and you had a small stadium. What did the Giants do to offset that? Where did they get their money from? And maybe it would have grown more in New York, or am I just wishing and hoping?
No, I mean, it certainly possibly could have been more. If they were the only National League team in New York, I'm certain it would have grown. I think he recouped some of it by, well, he wasn't losing any money, Stoneham, which the last couple of years at the Polo Grounds were not very profitable for him. But also, I think their radio deals were much more lucrative than they had previously had in New York. So they made part of the money back through the radio deals. Not all of it, but part of it. So, and, he was recognizing this is going to be a temporary situation. I mean, if you think about it too, I mean, even if they can only, get 20,000 people or so in a sealed stadium, the last couple of years in New York at the Polo Grounds, they were getting like 5,000 to 6,000 people on average for the games. And most of those people, the vast majority, well, not majority, but about 40% of the attendance at the Polo Grounds in 56 and 57 was when the Dodgers came to play the Giants. So,
I'm just thinking looking into the future, I guess that's what they were betting on, was the future, and looking into New York into the future was a non sequitur, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting how it could have played out, with Shea eventually being built, the Mets obviously becoming a very successful franchise themselves, with, I might add, a very expansive television policy as well. So, yeah, there's a lot of what ifs.
So he just basically broke even till a couple of years after when the TV got started, basically then. Is that what the Giants did, break even?
I think they did
years?
better than that personally, but I don't have the figures. I'd have to look that up.
Okay. All right. So thank you. I'm just rooting for New York, I guess. All right.
Hey, I guess I never realized how spoiled I was when I first started watching baseball here in New York. They had every Met game on, it seemed. That's how you got to know, Ralph Kiner and Bob Murphy and Lindsey Nelson. The games were on it every day, it seemed. So anyway, Paul, you're up.
Yeah, Dave, thank you very much. I have two questions. One is there a correlation between the increased number of Giant games being televised and the decreased popularity of baseball in the Polo Grounds? In other words, did more people stay home and really watch the games on TV versus go to the Polo Grounds to go see that? Or was the team, less popular for other reasons? And then my second question really is more about the future of televised games, because if of course, I'm sure, as we all know now, when you want to watch a game on Thursday, you got to go to Apple TV. Want to watch a game on Friday, you got to go to something else, got to go to Hulu or something. And I got to tell you, as a longtime baseball fan, the MLB extra innings package seems to me to be relatively useless, because they've sold these other networks games, and I'm tired of having to pick up 4 networks in order to see good baseball.
Well, thanks for the question, Paul. Yeah, I feel your pain on your second question there, because I do feel the same way. One of the things I've taken away from what I've been doing with this project has been, what lessons are there or might there be for today, with the Dodgers and Giants experiences back then. And, especially, I mean, you've got it, we're fragmenting where the games are going. Regional sports networks are not healthy, and they may not have a very, great long-term survival. And so, I mean, one of the things I've been thinking about is that, at that point in time, the Dodgers and Giants were kind of putting all their TV eggs in one basket pretty much. And it seems to me today, what baseball and individual teams are doing or trying to do more, particularly in the wake of, like, the Padres had a situation, the Rockies, the D-backs, their regional sports networks basically went away on them. They're trying to diversify where they're airing their games more, and that's leading to some of the frustration I think that you're talking about, because baseball's kind of experimenting with the Apple Plus and Amazon and all these other places where you have to have 7 or 8 subscriptions to see all the games you really want to see. So that can be frustrating. On your first question, I mean, I think TV played a role. The wide availability of TV played a role in the attendance declines. There were certainly other factors as well. I mean, there were broader societal trends happening that, much as Horace Stone or Walter O'Malley might want to try to combat, they're larger than them. People are moving to suburbs. People are driving, not taking as much transportation. Horace Stone was always very vocal about the parking problems at the Polo Grounds and their inability to accommodate enough cars. And that was one of the things he really wanted out of San Francisco, was a big parking lot, so but I do think TV played a role. I think it would be naive to think it didn't. It might not have played as big a role as the owners might have thought it played in the day, but I think it certainly did play a role in the attendance declines.
Thank you, Dave, very much. Thank you.
Well, Howard and then Andy.
Yeah, hi, Dave. I was really looking forward to hearing you tonight because way back when I was a kid growing up in New York, I was a Giant fan, but I was also spoiled, like Gary was, by all the Met games. I mean, we had 130, 140 Met games on. As a Giant fan, I would buy the yearbook every year from a place in the Bronx called Manny's Baseball Land, near Yankee Stadium. I think the first book I got was 64 or 65. Because I wanted to follow the Giants a little more closely, who the players were. And I always went right to the TV section. I had a page with TV games, and I noticed 9 games all against LA. And I was, I was 12 years old or whatever I was scratching my head on that. I had an argument with my father. I asked him, Dad, why don't they do the games? And he said, well, if they do too many games, nobody will go to the games in person in Candlestick. Because Candlestick wasn't everybody's favorite ballpark. But I would say, listen, but they got Mays and McCovey and Cepeda and Marichal and the Alou brothers and this and that player and that player. They would go. And he said, no, they wouldn't go if all the games are on TV. So I shrugged it off and I said, okay, end of story. Then about 10 years later in 75, I was a broadcast journalism major in college. And I was in my senior year up at Syracuse. And we had to write a term paper. It was required. And it came back to me about the Bay Area baseball situation with TV 10 years earlier when I was a kid. So I was going to research it and write a term paper on what happened. What was this all about? So one reason I was looking forward to hearing you tonight is because you basically answered all the questions I had 50 years ago when I was a student at Syracuse. I wasn't allowed to do the paper. The professor turned me down on the proposal. I asked him why. He said, because it's not journalism. You're a broadcast journalism major. Sports, you're talking business, you're talking finance. I mean, he was very narrow-minded, this guy. He was literally old school. So I ended up doing a term paper on the trend for happy news, not eyewitness news, which is everywhere today. So I was almost going to do a paper on the topic that you did tonight. And after listening to you, I'm glad I didn't do it because it's a little bit too complicated for me. As a 22-year-old kid, I probably could never have written everything that you talked about tonight with ratings and pay TV and all that. But I still remember going back to those yearbooks and seeing 9 games, and it took me from 1964 to 2024 to get a good answer. Thank God I'm still breathing and I'm still around to finally get an answer to the question I asked my father: why aren't there games on TV in San Francisco? So I want to thank you very much for your presentation. I really enjoyed it, and I found it very informative.
Thank you,
Thanks very
Howard.
much, Howard.
Andy, you're up.
Thank you. I want to return to something that Mars raised and David kind of expanded on, but and that was the whole situation on the building of Dodger Stadium. I don't know where you got, what book gave you the idea, Mars, that O'Malley bought the stadium for the city. Just not the case. The city got the land after a failed attempt at public housing. They had to buy it from the federal government, which they did because they saw it a part close to downtown Los Angeles as a real development opportunity for the city. They then traded it to O'Malley for Wrigley Field, as David mentioned. O'Malley built the stadium there with his own money, unlike, say, Stoneham did in San Francisco. And frankly, you can see that Dodger Stadium still stands in Candlestick, which is now gone. So I think that there's a lot of misinformation out there about Dodger Stadium, and that's just another big piece.
Well,
Started to explain that very well.
Well, you did, but there's so many books I read on this thing and these things, and there's a lot of contradiction depending on the book you read. So that's where I got my information, from a book.
Well, I think if you look at the books that were done by people who really dug into the situation, Neil Sullivan or Dan Taylor or Eric Nussbaum, the people who contended that O'Malley bought the stadium later were just not right. He paid for it later. I mean, he had to borrow the money to build it, but he owned it
Look
from
on look on the first book written about Ty Cobb. Is complete. The facts are completely different on the second book.
Okay. Anyway, David, nice presentation.
Andy, thank you. David, I'm going to wrap it up unless anybody else has another question. David, what are your plans with this abstract? Are you looking to do something with all of this pay-per-view and cable stuff into a book, or?
I'm thinking about that, Gary. I'm taking it step by step at this point, presented at a few more places, hopefully. And yeah, I mean, it's actually an offshoot of my dissertation research from 25 years ago. So it's told from a different perspective, but I think I've got a lot of the makings of a book. And I quite frankly, I think it's a good story that people haven't heard, and I'd like to be able to tell it. So yeah.
It was a fabulous topic. Again, a topic that none of us have broached before in our group. So why don't we all give it up for David?
Thank you, everyone.
David, again, don't be a stranger. We will, I'm going to shut off the recording in a second. We will reconvene in 2 weeks with Josh Rawich from the Baseball Hall of Fame. Should be a great meeting, as was tonight. But enjoy your week off. I'll be sending out stuff via email if anything pertinent does come up. So until 2 weeks from now, we'll see you next week. Want to hang around, talk about Giant baseball? I'll be here. Good night, everybody.